Okay, this is our empathy experts, or I should say empathy activists circle. These are people who have are working extensively on the topic of empathy, and we're taking part in an empathy circle here. So let's get started with introductions. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. So for about 14 years, I've been working quite intensively on the topic of empathy. How do we build a more empathic society? Interviewing hundreds of experts on the topic and doing all kinds of different projects. So Martin, would you be willing to introduce yourself next?
Okay, my name's Martin Golder. I'm a mediator in British Columbia in Canada. Most of my career was actually as an architect, but I became a mediator in about 1996 and discovered that empathy was actually one of the central tools of conflict resolution. And I was woefully short of it. I often start my lectures by saying that my empathy was surgically removed in British boarding school. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I developed a concept of mechanical empathy, one might say. My wife says I should call it prosthetic empathy, for something you strap on. If you've had your empathy removed, you can strap on prosthetic empathy. And in fact, in terms of conflict resolution, it actually works very well. I would say I'm using the intellectual side of empathy. In that, I'm getting into content a bit here. But anyway, that's how I got into the whole subject of empathy. And I went on a bit of a quest, about a 15-year quest, to see if I could find the real thing. And how, at the time I started, it was generally thought that, you either had it or you didn't. And but as it turns out, as we now know, it can be taught, it can be acquired. And I've talked to many PhDs with fMRI machines that confirm that. So that's who I am.
Oh, great, thanks. Minter?
Work in progress, Martin, eh? So my name is Minter Dial. I am 54. I live in Europe. Although mixed baggage in my background, I've lived in Canada, United States, England, France, Spain, Switzerland, and a few other places. I've been lots of places. I was born in Belgium. And today I'm a speaker, author, filmmaker. And my last book, I don't have a copy of it, but I thought I'd drum up a digital version because I'm a kind of a digital geek. It's called Heartificial Empathy. This is, I don't know if you can see it, perhaps not so well.
You don't see it too well. I have a copy here. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay, now I see it.
More or less blurred out. Anyway, Heartificial Empathy, putting heart into business and artificial intelligence. And in the wake of that book, I've been looking at exactly how to encode empathy into businesses and into machines. And like you, Martin, I came into it saying, I must say I previously had come across it as a wonderful concept of running business in L'Oréal, where I worked for 16 years. And yet when I started to write the book, I realized that I too had some deficiencies in the empathy compartment. And I also, like you, got very sort of focused more on the, let's say, the cognitive side of it rather than the emotional side, which is something more learnable, I think, than the emotional or affective empathy.
Oh, great. Well, we're going to have a chance to talk about empathy here. We're doing an empathy circle, and I'll just give a short introduction. You both know how to do it, but for anyone watching, how an empathy circle works. We have on our website, we have a one-page description that's quite accessible. So an empathy circle is based on mutual active listening. So in this process, one person speaks and they select who they're going to speak to, and they talk about the topic at hand or whatever is alive for them, whatever comes up that's kind of a burning topic on top of your mind or feelings. You speak to the person you're going to speak to, you're chosen. that person, and you pause periodically, and that the person you're speaking to reflects back their understanding of what you've said, sort of recapping, summarizing, paraphrasing, but just kind of getting the essence of what the speaker is saying. And the intention is for the speaker to be heard to their satisfaction. And the speaker will have 6-minute turns. You can speak for 6 minutes on the topic. And then once you feel heard to your satisfaction, or the time is up, you can say, I feel fully heard. And then it will be the listener's turn to become the speaker, and then choose someone else in the group. And that person reflects back. And we go around for the time allotted. So a couple tips that as a speaker, you want to pause periodically so the listener can reflect back what they're hearing the speaker you say. And also, if you're the listener and the speaker is kind of going on and on, you can ask for a pause. Can you just pause and let me reflect back? Because it becomes a lot to sort of hold, if it becomes multiple concepts. So that's pretty much the essence of it. So in the as the listener, active listener, you're reflecting back the essence of what you hear, and you're recapping, and you're trying to avoid putting your own stuff in there, not putting any judgments or diagnosing or advising, but just really trying to share what you hear the person say. So that's the other component. So this topic is a bit of a meta sort of a topic. It's what is your experience of taking part in the empathy circle? So, what are you experiencing? What feelings come up? What insights come up? What do you like? What do you not like? So does that seem pretty clear? And I'll do the timekeeping as well. And so it's really about this practice, which, from my years of experience, I find this like the most sort of easy first step sort of gateway practice. So trying to sort of promote it, create as much information and experience around it as possible. That's why we're using the process and talking about it at the same time. So with that, if anybody would like to start, select who you'd like to speak to, and we can just get the ball rolling. If you want to speak to me as a sample, that's good too, or however anybody feels motivated.
Martin, do you feel like jumping in?
Well, I suppose somebody has to. You mean as a listener or a speaker?
As a speaker. We'd like to speak first.
Okay. Yes, okay. Minter, I guess we're somewhat limited in our choices today, but I choose you.
But you can choose the Joker.
I guess at the moment, one of the things I've wrestled with quite a bit is in mediations in conflict resolution. I often run into a perception that any expressions of empathy and compassion are considered weaknesses to be exploited by the other side. And I have a friend in Brussels, a corporate lawyer, and she says, empathy is no part of my business. It is just not part of my scene at all. And yes, go ahead.
So what I hear you saying, Martin, is that in your practice of mediation, you oftentimes come across the notions that empathy and or compassion can be seen as weaknesses, and some people will have a sort of a nervous reaction to it. So I don't want any of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I have an ongoing conversation with this particular corporate lawyer just because we became friends in Madrid at a conference there. And, and it's not that I'm trying to persuade her to adopt empathy, although perhaps I am. I sort of feel like my mission is to try and open her eyes to, and for me to find out from her experience, does empathy in fact have any meaning in the world that she exists in of corporate law, and she does conflict resolution between states, I guess is what she does.
So what you're sometimes feeling but not sure whether you are there to persuade her about the benefits or role of empathy in her work being a little bit different. She's a lawyer and seems to be mediating between states.
Right. And, you know, she may be right. Maybe empathy doesn't have any place in her world, and I feel a little unsure of that. And yet, you know, within the other world that I exist in, the sort of more empathic world where everybody is just like an empathy guru, it seems crazy to think that there's somewhere where empathy, as Paul Bloom might say, you know, is not appropriate.
So in your world, I assume what you mean there is sort of your peers as opposed to the work of mediation with people who are upset at one another. It seems that there are many people that obviously have drunk the Kool-Aid and think empathy is the greatest thing and is useful for everybody except for Mr. Bloom, who might be against empathy.
Right, absolutely. Okay, well, that was how are we doing for time? Oh, okay. Okay. So anyway, that's one of the areas that I have going on the sort of frontiers of my empathy research. Let's see, and I guess the other one that's really big right now for me is not so much the empathy thing, but it's, well, I was really glad to see Empathy Circles and Extinction Rebellion kind of coming into some kind of alignment there and talking to each other. I have a group called The Final Run, which is not only individuals' final run, the period between, say, retirement and death, something like that, but also a cultural final run for humanity is paralleling that individual process. And I'm not sure, I mean, it's a kind of a separate thing from empathy, but then empathy infiltrates everything, and the final run for at the moment in our human culture is the dominant story.
So you were, first of all, saying that this is a second big area of interest, I suppose, within empathy, when you were excited to see how Empathy Circles and the Extinction Rebellion threads were weaved in, and then you link into that this notion of the final run, whether or not it's the let's move it into the hospice, at least, as we move towards death, and I suppose the stages before that, or on a more meta-cultural level, the end of civilization, or somehow some of our civilizations, if that's what I understood.
That's right. Yes, and how might, I mean, Edwin has a very strong model that he would tout, I think, as a sort of a solution to everything in some ways. Maybe not. You can correct us on that later, Edwin. But and I wonder. I don't know. Could I go to the front lines? What does empathy look like on the front lines? I have a lot of kind of unknowns in my life around the future unfolding and how it will actually hit me and how I will actually react in those more extreme situations.
So, if I understand correctly, you're looking at, well, you wonder how empathy will play out at the front line, wherever that front line abstract as it might seem in terms of the evolution of society and where in control of that and how empathy will play out within that. And you sort of question, and of course, the finality of the outcomes that might be facing in terms of society.
Yes, there were a few. You cut out a few things in that, yes, basically, I definitely feel that you heard what I was saying. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm assuming that it was technical cutouts, or because I was doing abbreviations of the
technical cutouts.
Yeah, your audio
I
is
see.
breaking up a little bit. Mhm.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I have a Parisian Wi-Fi system as well.
Yeah.
So
Fine.
Edwin,
Yep, listening.
let me speak to you. So empathy circles. Let me start by talking about my experience of them, and then move into what I think of them. So my experience of them was that I really felt very naive when I first embarked on them. And as I started, I really felt very inadequate in my ability to listen. And I could find my busy brain going haywire. And of course, this is also at the very beginning connecting into new people, which confuses my mind.
So what I'm hearing there is that your experience when you first started was one, you're feeling a sense of inadequacy, so maybe a bit of anxiety about that, and then also you have a lot of new people in the circle, and there's sort of so maybe some you didn't say the word anxiety, but maybe some anxiety around relating to the new people.
And then I see in the process of the very first one how I start to be a little bit more clued into it. Then there's the second empathy circle, and then it's a new set of people. I'm now a little acclimated to the ideas and the procedures of it, and yet I can still see my limbic brain coming out, or at least other elements of my reactions that confound what I'm hearing. And all the same, by the end, I feel like I'm back in a good place where, all right, I'm getting this. And then now I'm where I got to get go.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit there. You may want to pause your video just because your voice was breaking up. Might give you more bandwidth. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So I might. So do you want me to say
No,
it
no,
again?
I'll say what I heard. So what I heard is like the first circle you did, you had sort of that anxiety, but you started getting familiar with the process. So the second time, you still had, some discomfort, but you were getting more comfortable with the practice, and then that's kind of where I stopped hearing.
Well, it's got to the point now that I'm dialed in from minute one.
Okay. So from the beginning, you're familiar with it, and when you get started, like right now, you're just feeling more comfortable with it because
I
you're
feel like
familiar with the whole practice.
Yeah, my mindset's much more ready for having done several of these. Not only by notion of I have to meet Martin, new person. Obviously, I know you, and then there's the idea of that mind space to be present enough to really focus in on what's being said by the individuals.
Okay, so as you get more comfortable, you get more kind of present to be able to be present with people, and now you feel more comfortable and more present. Sort of, I'm adding some words there, but
that's right. No, but that's the notion.
Yeah.
All right, so that's my experience
Okay.
of the empathy circles. As to my opinion of them, so as a technique, I like a lot of the elements, the process, the notion of 2 hours and the limited number of people, like an empathy circle with 3, for example. I feel like there's more, there could be more flexibility within that. And certainly for the 2 hours on a practical level, especially since for me it's 7 p.m., to 9 p.m., it's a whack. That's dinner time,
Mm,
and we live in compressed times. So I feel like the 2 hours may be a very onerous element on an ongoing basis.
mm-hmm. So for the practical aspect, the time is difficult. I mean, 2 hours for an empathy circle with busy lives, is difficult, and especially if it's with finding times that work for other people, and then you're doing it around dinner time, and so that adds like another complication.
Right. I mean, of course, time is precious for everybody. So then the point becomes the usage of empathy circles, especially in my field, which is more in a business space. And it seems implausible for me to use an empathy circle um, in a business environment, especially since it feels like the real benefits start to sink in only at empathy circle 2 or 3. The
Mm,
sustainable benefits, the benefit where I feel like I'm ready, I'm in.
yeah. So there's with the empathy circle, it takes time to kind of work your way into the second, third one. And then by the third time, you feel comfortable, you're ready to really, get in deeper. And it sounds like you're saying that the time aspect in a business would be really difficult to do that because, just it takes so much time. Is that what?
Yeah, that's right. And if I have more time, Edwin?
That was 6 minutes, but if you want to just finish,
Right.
go ahead.
Well, just the final element is that I feel like the empathy circle is a good entree, as you say. Yet there need to be others that are, maybe sophisticate the elements of empathy in a business environment. So it's not just listening to the words being said, but it might be decoding the emotions and everything else that goes into empathy context.
So there's added to make it practical in a work environment. You feel there needs to be other sort of aspects brought in. For example, how do you read feelings or decode them?
Yes, I feel heard.
Okay, then I'll speak to Martin. Yeah, that is one thing. I like the term, I think it was Stephen Covey mentioned, empathy takes time and efficiency is for machines. so it's that notion that the one thing about empathy is it does take time, so that, and I find that like with doing the empathy circle, it usually takes about an hour to just for everyone to even start getting, kind of comfortable, getting familiar with the practice. And then it's sort of like in the second hour where everybody you sort of sink in deeper. And so that's my experience.
Okay. So what you're saying is that, empathy takes a bit of time. And as Stephen Covey said, empathy takes time and efficiency is for machines. And so your experience of the empathy circles is in that first hour is where people are just kind of coming to grips with, okay, so this is empathy and the process that's going on. And then in the second hour, they start to, okay, I get it now. And then maybe something deeper happens in that second hour.
Yeah, and the practice is basically is just active listening, a la Carl Rogers, who used he really developed the practice within the therapeutic realm of sitting with an hour with a client and just listening to them in using active listening or empathic listening. So it comes from that experience and that practice and the therapeutic world where the therapist just sits and listens in a non-directive way, just hearing the person who is speaking, giving them space to share, and having someone that's sort of accompanying them on their journey without trying to tell them where to go or what to do.
So one of the features of empathy circles comes out of the experience of the therapeutic movement and active listening. Carl Rogers and others, where you are, as the chosen listener in the interaction, you are just listening and paying attention and letting the other person feel that somebody is listening and somebody is hearing me, and get to the point where, wow, I've been heard.
And there's, all kinds of studies that, for really good, for a therapist to do, for healing, to offer healing, that the empathy is, an empathic therapist is the, it's kind of like a requirement. The best therapists are the most empathic ones in terms of for supporting people in their healing and growth.
So in terms of again, coming out of the therapeutic model and a healing modality within an empathy circle, the best listeners, the best healers are the people who are most empathic.
Yeah. And at least that's what the studies I've seen have been. And then, so what we're trying to do is take it out of this therapeutic realm where there's, a trained therapist, and bring it into a mutuality. So where it's mutual listening, something that anyone can do. So to make it sort of reproducible to the masses, so to speak, to the wide, anybody with a little bit of practice, do a couple circles, watch some, and then you can start taking part. So it's something that's, takes it out of the professional world and brings it into just human interactions.
So one of the things that you're trying to do with empathy circles is to take the healing and empathic mode and make it available to absolutely everybody. So not just, you don't have to go down to the therapist. You can get together with a bunch of people, have an empathy circle, and anybody can do that.
Yeah, and when I did some, like you're a mediator, and so I've done mediation trainings here as well. And from my observation, it's this mutual, the mediator is sort of like trying to listen to the different parties empathically, and then get the parties to empathically listen to each other. It's like the core practice, it seems to me, of mediation. And the empathy circles is sort of like the core of that mediation. It's the core practice. So if there's a conflict, you bring it into an empathy circle. The whole practice, using mutual active listening, sort of unravels can unravel the Gordian knot of those conflicts.
Right. So in paralleling empathy circles to a practice of mediation, there's a lot of similarities there in terms of the essence of a mediation and conflict, dealing with conflict, is to empathically go to each party and have each party feel heard, not only by the mediator, but also by each other.
Yeah, I've got a ton more to say, but my time is up. I feel heard.
Okay, great. Well, maybe I'll talk back to you then.
Okay, cool.
On this one.
Mix it up. It's good.
Yeah, I liked what Minta was saying. I mean, jumping straight into the reason for this. I mean, focusing on our reaction to empathy circles and how we have experienced them. I think, for me, I've often said that I love the fact that you have those two weights that you sometimes lift up behind you and say it's all about the practice. You just keep exercising those empathic muscles and they get stronger and stronger. I think for me that the listening is the key, really. And sometimes it's pretty difficult, to actually listen to people and to actually hear what they're saying. Sometimes it's opaque, and then my mind wanders, and I'm not focused. And I think the empathy circle for me has been a really good. It's like an exercise. It is like this, it's this.
So what you're speaking to is the exercise. It's that it's an exercising and a practicing of it, and it's analogous that I can use that metaphor too, or that story, and show the weights, and so you do see it as a practice. And it sounds like sometimes when you're listening to people, it's clear what they're saying, and other times it's sort of opaque too. So you kind of have different qualities of hearing people.
Yes, absolutely. And so my experience of the empathy circles has always been that, wow, and as you know, sometimes I found it quite hard, quite difficult. And then at other times it just flows. And so that probably is the familiarity again that Minter talked about of doing it 2 or 3 times, and eventually it flows a lot more easily. And
yeah, so sometimes you're noticing the different qualities of it, that sometimes when you're taking part, it's like it's difficult, and other times it flows, and perhaps part of the flow is just doing it more.
Yes.
Positive.
Yes. And then the other thing that Minter was talking about there too was what he thought of it, and what he thought of the empathy circles. And so I was just thinking about that a little bit. I mean, usually when I finish one, I'm thinking, wow, that is a really good technology. I really like that. And it is very simple, as you mentioned, very similar, as you mentioned, to some of the situations might be in a mediation. It's, there is a part of the practitioners, and, I've certainly been there, where you want to react to what somebody else is saying, as opposed to just telling them what they said. And I think the discipline of going through that to just reflecting what they've said is one of the powerful things. And I'm just thinking of that example the other day on the climate change thing, where one of the participants had really, really very, very different views about that, and it was very hard not to react to some of those views.
Mm-hmm. So again, maybe part of the practice is that, like, when you're listening to someone, you find that you're wanting to react to them. Like, they say something, you want to immediately react, and it's sort of in the practice you're only having to listen. So it's a good practice just to listen. And there was actually an example, in the climate change, where somebody was saying something you felt was maybe sort of outrageous, and you just really wanted to react to it, but you had to sort of hold back and just listen.
Yes. And so, when I, think of, you're moving the empathy circle into contentious realms, with the protesters at Berkeley or the climate change thing, where you really get people on with different views. I think for a long time I wondered, how useful is it going to be? Will people play the game? Will they abide by the rules? And no, I just want to shout you down. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing your stories on some of those more extreme situations too.
Yeah, so you're wondering, like, in really contentious situations with people doing empathy circles, would they stay with the practice and the process, or would they just start yelling at each other? And so you're kind of interested in hearing, like, stories about it, and so just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. No, I'd be interested in hearing some of your views on that. I don't know.
If you feel fully heard, either if you're fully heard. Okay.
Okay. No, I mean, how could I not feel fully heard talking to you?
Yeah, you feel fully heard, like listening to me, me listening to you. Okay, then I'll speak to, thanks, Minter. And you're muted.
So I still have my video off. I suppose I could do it when I'm not speaking, but in this case, to keep it good, I'll...
Yeah, probably need to, yeah. So, okay, let's see. Wow, that was great. Really. So yeah, there's a lot of things coming up. One thing, sort of responding to Mentor, you're saying that about the empathy circle being sort of there needs to be more in business. I do see it as the empathy circle is like a first step, but it's like a really important first step. And it's like, and like with the practice, it's just like I feel like you need to practice it. You need to get really comfortable with it. Just like when you're getting more and more comfortable with it, Mentor, that, if you just keep doing it and doing it, you get more and more, that comfort kind of gets deeper and deeper ingrained. And I think that's what the practice of it is that getting really, really comfortable with the practice.
So while I had mentioned I needed, Mentor had mentioned more complexity, maybe other elements necessary, you reiterate it is a first base, and yet really fundamental element that needs to be practiced on an iterative basis.
Yep.
In order to be, continue to get good at it.
Yeah, and it's something that we could teach every person in the world to become a facilitator. It's sort of doable in terms of everyone could learn the practice. And I think it would be like it'd be sort of like a first step, momentum to get people to go down that path, the empathy path. So if we can, that's what my sort of goal is around the empathy circle, really to sort of mass produce it and then make it something that's just accessible for everyone to do, because people can get a lot of benefits out of this. You get a huge amount of payoff benefits just with this first basic practice.
Yeah, so you're looking at the empathy circle as a way to democratize the notions, and you see it as being something that many people could facilitate. Once you've done it a few times, you get the process, and you could make it therefore easier, more accessible to many more people.
Yeah, for example, in my family this Sunday, we're going to be doing a family empathy circle. And we just did one, a month and a half ago. So we have this issue in the family. The last one was 4 hours, and we'll probably go another 4 or 5 hours this Sunday. So we get the family together, and we, just kind of talk about this family issue, and it really helps. The family members have become very trusting in the practice. Things that would have blown up before, it's like he'll say, oh, if I just stick with this practice, I'll be heard, we'll be able to work things through. So that's just something I could see every and any family, using this practice, quite quickly. And you can really, get a lot of benefits in your family or, with close relationships in terms of having this tool to work out issues.
So you've used the empathy circle within your family and are articulated around one specific issue. It went on for 4 hours, and then you're going to do another one, and you can see it going on the same amount of time. In the process, it's the layer of trust as everybody feels, oh, I'm beginning to get it, and I know that I at least will have my chance to be heard.
Yep. So it is that trust building aspect, and it's also a sort of a fallback position that you can get really good at the practice, and then you can sort of let go of it and just dialogue. You can just turn it into regular dialogue, but then dialogue can break down, right? It's like just kind of using typical dialogue breaks down. You say, oh, it's broken down. This is our fallback position, is the empathy circle. So it's sort of like a safety net in terms of conflict, that, okay, we can just chat and it's fine. And invariably things break down. Somebody says something, somebody gets pissed off. The tensions start rising, you say, up, let's go back to the empathic listening, mutual empathic listening. And then you kind of build up trust and you can let go of it again.
So in the nature of a conversation, or, in your family empathy circles, you might switch off the empathy circle technical elements and move into a more natural, organic conversation.
Yeah.
But as soon as the conversation then starts wobbling and issues start returning back into the conversation, you can circle back and use the empathy circle to normalize, maybe safety net, the word you used, allow us to come back to some kind of safer space and then continue on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
My pleasure. So let me, for the sake of keeping the rhythm different, I don't know, I'm going to speak back to you, Edwin.
Okay.
So I have let's say, my angle, of course, is very much the business filter. And I also have this AI filter. And I have explored how machines could detect empathy. And that's sort of where my baggage is when I come into this.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you have two areas that you're focusing on is the business, empathy in business, and empathy in AI. So there's sort of like filters or baggage that you're bringing with you.
Absolutely. As opposed to mediation or, let's say, family issues. And as such, I'm quite interested in understanding, building up context, call it data points in AI, and reading emotions such as they are expressed through so many different ways, including voice, facial expressions, heartbeat, body language, and as a result, I'm curious to see how empathy circles could evolve to allow us to pick up on these other elements, which are not, I would say, intrinsic to the notion of strict listening.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at empathy within AI as, how do you read the body language, the tone of voice, and create these different data points for artificial intelligence. And you're just wondering how the empathy circle could sort of fit into that framework of AI and the technical aspect of the computer aspect, I guess.
For example, at this very moment, being meta, you are only listening to my voice. You have no indication as to whether I'm standing up, I'm frowning, I'm being cynical, sarcastic, or whatever. And therefore, you're focused on one single signal, which is the words coming out of my mouth and the intonations that I have. And that's one form of listening. But I could very well be spinning a story and inside by crossed arms showing very different type of body language, but that's not picked up in the empathy circle as it sits.
Mm-hmm. So right now, I'm only hearing your voice and the intonation, and your body language could be something totally different. So we're only picking up sort of one channel of your expression versus the physical, how you're physically looking, if it's crossed arm or whatever. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I find that notion of context and emotion reading necessarily important in building up cognitive empathy. I'll leave you to swallow that one.
Yeah. So it's important. So what I'm hearing is it's important to have all those sort of data points, those different, for building cognitive empathy. I think.
Yes. And so yes, that's if it's hard to hear. I'm sorry about that. But the other zone of interest for me is that this format is fungible, so we can use it for families and mediation. But it strikes me that the question we're going to debate is structure, is structuring, so that if we're in a mediating or conflictual environment, the nature of our ability to stick with that constrained question or issue is deeply important, and the ability for the moderator to keep us focused on that specific zone that we've mutually agreed to in advance.
So one aspect of an empathy circle is sort of staying on topic. And how does, I think, is it like, how does a facilitator or team leader, whatever, keep people on topic instead of it kind of drifting all over the place? Is that?
Yes, of course. It's interesting that you have to struggle with the technical elements of listening as well. Sorry about that. But so my point was, first, there's the complexity of listening and reading emotions that go beyond reformulating the words I'm listening to a la Rogers. And two, the nature of the issue that we're discussing. For example, people you know very well, it's oftentimes much harder to be empathic with them than it is with a person you're sitting beside on an airplane meeting for the first time.
Okay, so there's sort of the understanding part that seems to be important, that you can have really good understanding for someone who you don't know personally, you know, like on an airplane, that you could have deep understanding with them, and it may be more difficult with your family member who you have more kind of issues with.
Well, more baggage.
More baggage.
Anyway, so I just was thinking in the empathy circle, the way I'm approaching this is layering in these two other areas. One is the different emotional readings and context data points that are ultimately going to be necessary for artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And two, to think about the spectrum of people and issues that we're looking at. And I think there's a modularity that could help us to make empathy circles more efficient, not necessarily in time, but specific to what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So you're saying that the empathy circle could be developed to make it more effective in terms of the outcome that's desired?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So that's
okay.
I feel heard, Edwin.
Okay,
that was
great.
a mouthful.
Then Martin, to speak
Okay.
to you. Yeah, so one of the things that keeps coming up to me is so the building on the empathy in the empathy circle, how to sort of expand it. Like I just keep focusing on this first step, but there is another step that I think would be important, which is the feeling part. Is that as the speaker, you know, we can deepen the empathy circle by the speaker sharing more of their feelings. Like I could share more of my felt experience right now, and that would kind of contribute to the deepening, the emotional deepening of so the speaker can do something too, is speak more from their emotional, feeling state.
Right. So in this first stage of the empathy circle, you're kind of where we focus on the back and forth, the active, the reflective listening. You're looking to move that into perhaps the emotional level. So what can the speaker do in telling their story that carries more emotion, and can that be reflected back by the listener?
Yeah, and it's actually easier for the listener to reflect back feelings and complex, you know, concepts. I've noticed too.
So you see, yeah. So for the listener to reflect back feelings, I can immediately see that. Sorry. And as opposed to sometimes we get into some very complex, wordy things, and the listener has a hard time with that sometimes.
Yeah, so this was actually already with Carl Rogers and his grad students, because there's a whole field of how to take it to the next step, and all these different grad students of Carl Rogers kind of took it off in all kinds of different directions. And the one was Gene Genlin, one of his grad students, who said, who are the people in therapy who are having the most growth, kind of like emotional, working through their problems, and what is it that's making them more successful? And from his studies, it was the people who spoke about their felt experience in the moment and shared their felt experience in the moment had the most growth. So he developed a whole practice called focusing, which I would call self-empathy, is to notice your own felt experience in the moment and share that, and then have someone be accompanying you with empathic listening. So that would be a step, another step to deepening the practice, is for the speaker to get really good at just sharing how they feel. How do I feel in the moment? I feel pretty excited about the topic here. I feel kind of relaxed and spacious. I feel kind of a sense of warmth, towards, both of you for kind of exploring this topic. So that's just some of the, I feel sort of a spaciousness, curiosity.
Mm-hmm. So from Carl Rogers' work and the various students who went off and explored his work more deeply, one of the subjects was who's getting the best results, and how is that happening? And it was discovered by one of his students, I don't know the name,
Gene Genlin,
who discovered that the people who shared more of their emotional states in the moment tended to get the better results. And so you're thinking, if we apply this to empathy circles, where people are encouraged perhaps to share more of how they're actually feeling in the moment at a very emotional level, that might be a place for empathy circles to explore some new territory.
Yeah, that would be a next step, and I shared some of my experience too. So that was just as an example.
You were saying how you felt very expansive, and were there some other ones?
Yeah, just excited.
Excited, yeah. Okay.
On others things, yeah.
And then you thanked us for sharing this experience.
Yeah, I was sharing my gratitude. I feel gratitude that you're here, talking about this and exploring this together. So I do feel gratitude for your participation.
Okay, you feel gratitude.
Yeah. The other thing about that I've been thinking just recently in the last year, it's just been sort of an explosion of talk about empathy and artificial intelligence. And the one concern I have is that it's like, here's this simple practice of just doing empathic listening, but people want to go off and do all this complicated computer stuff, and I would like to see them first master this simple, practical step. I mean, all those people, all those articles, all those writers that I see, can you just learn and practice something that's sort of accessible? And I've talked to artificial intelligence people, and I don't know, it just seems like, oh, yeah, it's kind of a sales. I'm not saying this for the mentor, but this is like, it's the sales job, and it's like, but they couldn't even do empathic listening. You know what I mean? It's I get a little concerned about that it becomes like, oh, it's this hot topic. But how about starting with just have all those folks who are studying artificial intelligence just learn to do an empathy circle to begin with and get good at it, and then build. It would actually help in the development of the artificial intelligence, I think, to have those deeper personal experiences.
Okay, so with the fact that in the AI world, the exploration of ethics and empathy is a really hot topic. you're feeling that perhaps all these people who are studying that could use an empathy circle or two to just come to the basics of learning some of those skills on the front lines of their lives, kind of thing.
And it would improve the work that they're doing, I think.
Right. And so then they could take that experience and start applying that in the work they're doing in AI.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I'll just keep moving around the circle then, and down to you, Minta. And
I'll stop my video.
Well, no, you don't have to while you're listening, if you like. Actually, yeah, leave it up. It is really nice just to actually be to see you, as opposed to the line of some code across there that comes when you're not there. But if you start breaking up, I'll let you know. You can see I have a picture of France on the wall behind me here. That's France up there.
Je vois ça, évidemment, j'ai vu ça.
Okay. Yeah. It's the waterways. We have a boat in France. So
nice.
We come over periodically. So, okay. Those were some real. I mean, this is just so exciting. I am feeling quite excited to be here, I must say. You know, and it's funny because it is such a simple practice, and yet within that simple practice, there are like so many embedded skills and that make me happy to be here. And then you know, with meeting you, Minta, here too is also extremely exciting too. You know, to hear such a, if I might say, such an intellect, you know, talking is just always really, really exciting. So thank you for being here.
Well, I shake my head in I shake my head in total judgment. Try to refuse the judgment that you were making, maybe. But anyway, that was sort of, I'm not sure what sort of sense of humor that was. But anyway, what you are experiencing is excitement of how can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. How the empathy circle is a seemingly simple exercise, but it very quickly explodes into many more different pieces that are interesting in their own elements. And anyway, you're enjoying the experience of this empathy circle.
Yes, very much. Thank you. And where could it go? I mean, this AI thing is, as Edwin was saying, it's obviously very big, and obviously you're very much into it. And I even had a little conversation with Aggregate IQ about it the other day. But as being a Victoria company, you know, here in Canada, it's, you know, whenever I introduce the concept of, you know, empathy into the AI conversation, there are a lot of head shakers, you know. You know, you have the old classic of the automated car and the old lady and the kids on the crosswalk, you know, and how does the AI make that kind of decision? And then it's becoming much more, you know, it's moved to so much more complex levels now. So you're talking about the body language and all the features that you know, facial recognition software can detect about speakers as being part of that input. It's at the moment, it's just like a huge humble jumble, you know, in my mind. It's definitely not organized. And just to finish, I'd say that there's a very funny video of a guy and his daughter, or a little kid, like a 1-year-old or 1.5-year-old kid, talking, and the kid is going, la, 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 and the dad's going, all right, and the kid goes, right, and they have this long conversation with absolutely no words, and it's like it's and you'd swear they were talking, and they are talking. There's definitely a conversation happening there between them, with this child language. What would AI make of that, I wonder?
So, a lot to digest. So looking at empathy in artificial intelligence, which is a burgeoning area, and the complexities within it, let's say we're far from convincing you of the possibilities or maybe probabilities of it anyway within artificial intelligence. And you're still, say, on the fence as to its possibility. And you reference the idea of all the other elements that go into a conversation, including nonverbal communication, because in that case, you have a father and a child who aren't verbalizing words that are cognitively recognizable, but still are conversing, and probably there's some sort of empathy and emotion going on there. And what would a machine think about that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I think it's not so much that I'm not convinced that this is a path that or almost a rabbit hole that we're going down. It's more that people in conversations that I'm with are not convinced about it.
Yes.
I think I'm, I would certainly be happy to be on the front line of working with, artificial intelligence people on some of those issues, because it is fascinating. Although I confess what I was saying, that I do feel lost. I feel very lost in those realms.
So you come across many people who are dubitative about the idea of empathy in AI. You're excited about it, yet it's, let's say, a vast, if not confusing topic.
Absolutely, yeah. So is there some place like empathy circles, as Ed was saying? It's this simple technology. It's like an introductive technology. How would empathy circles fit into this burgeoning field of AI, empathy and AI? And I mean, I guess one tends to have mixed feelings about the whole world of AI, but you can have mixed feelings about anything, and it still comes rolling down the pike at you. So you sort of have to just kind of take it on as it comes.
So we're not sure about the possibilities of empathy in AI, but it does seem, let's say, more likely to be in our future. And then the question is, how do we take it on? And it's going to be each one to their own, because everything can be good or bad. It depends how you use it, if I can reformulate.
Yes, there's certainly an essence. Yeah, that's true. I often say to people, you can build a house with a hammer, or you can hit somebody over the head. So, as you say. Okay, well, no, I feel heard on that. Thank you.
Lovely. So I'm going to come back at you, Martin, with video in queue. You can raise your finger if you need me to kill the video. That way you can practice just audio. So empathy circles as a method have definitely improved my understanding of listening skills, and I understand their benefit as an introductory element. I yet need to figure out step 2, step 3, because change in an organization typically can't just stay at the listening space. For example, at the conclusion of every empathy circle, the business-minded individual will want to know, all right, what did we agree on? We agreed on we might be better listeners.
Okay, so the empathy circles for you have definitely increased your appreciation and abilities, perhaps even in listening. And how do we move that into the next step? Or in fact, what is the next step of that process? Because within, you mentioned a business context, for instance, you would come to the end of an empathy circle and people would want some answers. They want it laid down. Okay, what did we decide? You know, what is that? And is that a piece of empathy circles that needs to be developed? Or
just like presumably in mediation, or the issue that's at hand, we could talk about an issue that's non-contentious, and we have a nice time. But nice times, people get irritated in a business environment about that. We kind of need to have an objective and a resolution. And if you have mediation, you kind of want a solution to the issue that you're mediating around. And therefore, as a judge in a courtroom will decide, there is a decision or some resolution, and even the expression of the resolution can by itself be contentious.
Right. So with the empathy circles, I mean, you still, or rather with a mediation, moving into that kind of model, as you come to the end of the mediation, there is a decision needed or an outcome that is desired by the parties. And how do you bring that into the empathy circle context? Did I get that right?
That's right, because ultimately in a courtroom, typically there's a judge with a gavel that bang and says the decision, worded hopefully with some empathy, according to the loser and the winner or whatever. Yet, so in a business environment, whether with forgetting mediation, we might be talking about an issue. We'll use the empathy circle as a format to resolve or improve our abilities to work together, because maybe as a team we stopped functioning well. And as maybe a little bit what Edwin said before is, if you move into the organic form of life where we converse in a natural way, it can become a method of coming back to. So it almost feels like that might be an interesting area to formalize, moving from empathy circle, organic conversation, back to empathy circle, and how that process could be more formalized in its way back into a work environment.
Okay, interesting idea. So because there is a desire in many of the situations where the empathy circles might be introduced as a problem-solving technique, but there was a desire for some kind of outcome, and how one of the processes that might achieve getting to that outcome would be to allow the empathy circle to move into a more natural dialogue until it needs until it goes off the rails or something like that, and then there's a process, a formal process to take it back into the empathy circle again. And so you would have this natural mechanism to go into dialogue and then back into the empathy circle.
I feel heard. I feel that could be really interesting in a work environment, and I would I don't want to give in on, but I would agree that would need at least 2 hours, because you need to sort of exercise empathy circleness, then move into conversationalness, and then see how it wobbles, and then bring back empathy circleness
Right.
in a natural way, such that it represents how we are in real life. Because that's the issue, is you move away from the 2 hours into the other 22. And it's and what we need is that to exist in the 22.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're a little reluctant to give up your objection to the 2-hour time frame. However, with these added mechanisms of moving into natural speech and then back into empathy circle mode, you could see that 2 hours would probably be a sort of a minimum time for that. And it's definitely an area in your view that is worth exploring in a formal way.
Thank you, Martin. I feel heard.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Well, I guess I'll go on around the circle then to you, Edwin.
Okay, listening.
You know, there is a natural part of me, I find, in the empathy circles and in other people too, I'm sure, that continually wants to break into that normal dialogue mode. You know, I've been in many situations where a very structured environment has made that break into a natural, and sometimes well, but more often in my world, not well. The structure of mediations, which have some similarities to this, you know, if you just kind of let it go ragged, it can break apart pretty quick, and you know, you end up with everybody shouting, and then you got to kind of bring the whole thing back to square one and start again. Sometimes it's good. So occasionally, you know, sometimes people just like to get, you know, they got to get the steam out. Sometimes you just got to let them go and, you know, have a big dump and get it all out. And then you wait until all that's done, and then you kind of move into a more structured approach to a solution.
So it sounds like there's two parts to it. One is in the practice we've been doing now, you've been feeling like you're wanting to just start speaking. So kind of a desire to just kind of go into the whatever's on your mind, kind of respond, and that you're just noticing that, as well as you're looking at within mediation. How have you seen that work? Where, you know, you have the structure, and then sort of no structure. Everybody just doing whatever, you know, reacting however they want. And sometimes you just have to let people react so they can express all those pent-up frustrations, and then you can go to the structure. So you're just sort of exploring the relationship of that structure, and so not having that structure.
Right, absolutely. I'm just wondering whether it's, you know, whether we should almost give it a whirl, you know, give it a try, whether we should, so what would that even look like? You know, having been in empathy circles now, I don't even know how that would work, because usually it involves, you know, somebody speaking and somebody else speaking and then somebody else coming in, and I don't even know how you would break into that and break out of it.
Uh-huh. So kind of moving from the structured process into dialogue and then back into it, like Minter was talking about as well. You're not sure like how that practice would work. And you're even maybe thinking of suggesting it here. Or could we just go into, you know, dialogue without, you know, the practice process, the structure?
Right. So, and, you know, within that dialogue mode, it would be the sort of thing where I would, or one of us would ask a question, and then somebody would answer a question. So I might ask you a question of, within the development of empathy circles to sort of level 2, or what do they say now, dot 2 or something like that, empathy circles, I might say, well, what are your ideas on that, Edwin? What have you got in mind? And then you would, you know, say, well, actually, this is what I've got in mind. And and then Minter would say, oh, well, that's really, how about this question? So I guess you get into this kind of question and answer exploration around a group. Maybe there's some little kind of structural. I mean, maybe they are in fact other structures that are as highly disciplined as this one, but are just a bit different.
Mm-hmm. So there could be, you're just saying how you can move from this structure to another structure, and everything's a structure, I guess, in that sense. There's another structure, but how do you move from one structure to the other, which has different, qualities and nature to it? And so you're just kind of thinking different rules, like how do you shift between these structures?
Yeah. And then as soon as you relax the rules, or not relax, but shift to a different set of rules, it also creates license for people to behave in different ways, oh, that rule doesn't apply anymore. Now I can do this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you shift the rules, you can act differently and behave differently. And
and I must say, one of the things I like about the empathy circles is the rigid structure. I find, and I'm really surprised that people go along with it, but maybe the people who don't want to go along with it never show up. That's why you have a problem getting right-wingers in your left-right conversations, because maybe it's too tight for them or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So there's a little surprise, like here's this rigid structure, and surprised that people go along with it, and you're just kind of exploring, well, maybe some people just don't want to take part in that rigid structure, and they just wouldn't show up. And maybe political right is like that.
You see, that's so excellent. I was trying to trick you there. I was trying to get you to comment back on what I was saying, as opposed to just reflecting it.
So this was a little trick. He was like, really, let's see if Edwin would respond back, and it's just reflected. And so
that's right. Very good. Well, thank you very much. I feel heard.
Okay, speak to Minter then. The whole notion of AI-assisted empathy circles sounds pretty good. It's like there's the structure of the empathy circle, and it could be sort of assisted with AI, right? There could be a tool set or software or something that kind of helps with the empathy circle practice. I'm not quite sure what that would be. I might actually have some ideas, but just the idea of it, sort of a tool set. In a sense, we have a little bit assisted here because we're recording this, right? We have technology that is recording the empathy circle. So it's sort of like a technology-assisted empathy circle that we have here, since we're in different parts of the world on top of it. So we already have a little bit of assistance.
So there's an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So there could be an opportunity for AI to augment the empathy circle, although you have some ideas, but it's still, let's say, embryonic as to how that would work. But it might be a layer on top of our technologically enhanced anyway, because we're already doing video via remote empathy circles.
Yeah, I had talked with someone from Skype who was an engineer there. He contacted me, and he was interested in empathy, and he was going to start working on a project on it. And then we just had a discussion about the empathy circle, and he started coming up with all kinds of ideas. He had all kinds of software that I'm not familiar with, but that has a lot of logic in it. And when I told him about feelings and needs as part of the empathy circle process, he got really excited because he saw a feedback loop that could be it. If you have a feedback loop within a process, you can keep learning because you have something to test against, and then I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, so if there were enabled to tag for feelings and needs, that could, according to this Microsoft guy or Skype guy, help to create a feedback loop, so we would integrate learning directly into the process.
Yeah, and he had all kinds of off-the-shelf, tool sets that could be brought to bear, but then he got pulled off onto another job, and that kind of got dropped, unfortunately. I think that could have been really powerful. But I think that, like Microsoft with Skype or, Zoom or Facebook, they could be using this process for what they're doing. They have all kinds of conflict. They're defunding people's YouTube as well, demonetizing them, kicking them off their platforms. It could be their willingness to do an empathy circle could be part of the practice for conflict resolution. So there's a huge amount of technology that could be brought into these platforms, using empathic listening, and then assisted tools, right? Artificial intelligence technology tools to assist these dialogues.
So there's an opportunity even within these video platforms to consider empathy circles as one of the conduits for helping resolve some of the conflicts that we have. For example, demonetizing, kicking people off YouTube because of something that they have said or shared, and we could use empathy circles to resolve those type of conflicts, even within a Zoom or a YouTube or a Skype.
Yeah, they could have, instead of they kicked off the guy from InfoWars. I can't remember his name right now. Anyway, he was kicked off of YouTube. And what if they would have said, well, if you want to stay on our platform, you have to do an empathy circle with the family members from Newtown who you're really attacking or, criticizing and saying that, well, maybe that's just all made up, those shootings. So there could have been something with sort of a mediation, and there's all kinds of opportunities like that. They could have, the political left is trying to defund, kick off the right, and they're they're doing stuff with YouTube saying, oh, these are terrible people, kick them off. They kick them off, and the right is all pissed off. And there could have been this could be a mediation that they could sort of support between the sides.
Right. So in the case of the guy from InfoWorld being kicked off for presumably saying something negative to the people from Newtown for the shooting,
yeah.
Maybe they could have proposed, rather than kicking him off as a sort of a unilateral decision, come back and say, listen, if you'd like to stay on, keep being monetized, this is the price you have to pay.
Yeah.
Go do an empathy circle with the people you slagged off.
Yeah, Alex Jones, for example, was his name. That's right.
Right.
So this also about this feedback loop. That is, again, the work of Marshall Rosenberg, who was a grad student of Carl Rogers. That's why I just see Carl Rogers just set this, foundational empathic listening is this foundational practice. And it's gone in so many, if you look at it's gone in so many different directions, have been built on this one kernel of the practice. And Marshall Rosenberg's insight was, well, there's these feelings, just like Gene Genlin said, but behind feelings like anger, sadness, there's feelings that people are desiring. If they're angry, they're desiring respect, or so the feeling of respect or something. So it's kind of mapping out the territory of feeling, the world of feelings, right? It's like there's how do these feelings relate to each other? What's behind feelings? And so that's that aspect. So that was another piece in terms of the feedback loop of the needs that people have, the desired feelings that they have. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Right. So you're interested in looking at the ways we could create feedback loops, and how Rogers' approach to therapy listening with Armstrong was more the learnings you can have outside of just the listening element. And
it was Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication that was sort of, he developed that practice. Yeah.
Right. Rosenberg, nonviolent communication, not Armstrong. I don't know where I got that one from. The busyness in the mind. But anyway, the idea of being able to integrate feedback loops, which technology could help, by the way, of course, introduce into the empathy circles.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel very heard. Thank you.
Hmm.
So I am excited by the idea of a layer of artificial. Oh yeah, who am I speaking to? Martin.
Okay.
Forgot about the process, getting natural on you. So I am interested and excited by the idea of artificial intelligence being a layer on empathy circles, as some or many people start talking about AI as augmenting intelligence or assisting our intelligence as opposed to being a autonomous intelligence.
So you're excited about the link between AI and empathy, where AI comes in not as an autonomous force, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of it, but as an augmenting force. So it helps the process.
And I think it's worth mentioning the original AI was a machine with the name ELIZA. And in the 1960s, ELIZA was essentially a reformulator.
So the original AI machine, Eliza, in the 60s, was a reformulator. I don't know what a
And
reformulator is.
ELIZA, I will explain. So ELIZA was able to reformulate what she heard from the person. Of course, it was through text. And it turned out that the people in the office where ELIZA was invented wanted to spend hours with ELIZA because fundamentally they felt more heard by her than their peers or their friends.
So Eliza, back in that period, would reformulate the whatever was put in by text and feed it back out again. And the people who were working with Eliza actually felt more heard by Eliza than they did by their peers who were when they would feed back what they thought they'd said. So Eliza gave an accurate reformulation of what the person has said.
It wasn't necessarily accurate, but what they appreciated was the endless time that Eliza was prepared to do the listening per the issue of time efficiencies that we have today. And the infinite memory and the infinite time, if you will, of a computer does represent, at the one hand, a benefit, and at the other hand, a threat to our humanity if we don't realize that we should be more empathic as individuals.
So the fact, what they appreciated most was the fact that Eliza didn't have any time constraints. They could sit and talk to Eliza for as long as they liked, and Eliza wasn't going anywhere. Whereas a human in that situation might keep looking at their watch and want to be out of there. So they appreciated the time that Eliza was willing to spend with them.
Yes. So I also, my final thought that I had brought to the table before the empathy circle, about empathy circles, so meta, was doing it in person. And my only experience to date has been in the video format, where technology sometimes gets in the way, as we've experienced in this case. Yet, I have done now 3 smaller sessions that are in front of people in conferences, where I have 3 people doing with not 6 minutes, but 1 or 2 minutes empathy moments, and the experience of those individuals in just a few minutes inevitably illuminates light bulbs in their minds and sparks tremendous reactions from the individuals in the room.
So you've been, within the technological world, which is what we're doing now, and technology can get in the way sometimes of the communication that's happening. So in the face-to-face empathy circles, and you've been doing some of these in conferences with a 2-minute or so time schedule, and the reaction of the people who experience that, and the reaction of the people in the room is very dramatic. It's I'm not quite sure what the reaction is, other than it's very dramatic.
Well, like learning, it's the drama in the mind that might provoke the change. The notion of being in public is critical at this point, because it renders hyper difficult your ability to stay present, focus on the individual, knowing that you have 60 pairs of eyes, for example, looking at you and measuring every word and whether Martin got it right or wrong. And that pressure is a simulation of the busyness that we always feel somehow. It's not a simulation, it's sort of like a proxy for the busyness that we have.
I see. So within these contexts where, if you are one of these people talking or reflecting, you are very conscious of the fact that you have a whole audience there watching you at the time, and that audience, and that consciousness rather, it is a proxy for the normal thing that you would feel about trying to get stuff out and say things. It really hypers your focus onto that feeling.
Yeah, so I've been experimenting, and thus would like to say that one can gain kernels of what I'm trying to achieve, which is awareness of our inability to listen, awareness of the interest in wanting to listen more in a fabricated environment, such as having people do it in front of other people, which, by the way, we're doing because this is going to be retransmitted. But you and I, right now, we don't feel like we have a million eyes on us. But were we to be on television doing this, bon,
right,
I would argue we would be deep, noodling around.
Right. Wow. That's I got there. I can demonstrate my lack of ability to listen, and exactly what you were saying. I got so involved in trying to experience being in that situation that I kind of lost the thread. But what I got was that the being in front of the large audience of people, well, it certainly heightened the experience in some way. It just heightened the experience of being, of saying, and oh, I know what it was. It was the ability to become conscious of your own inability to listen, and to take some kind of action towards improving that ability to listen. It was in there.
Perfect. Yeah. So my gig is, finding ways for the remanence, as we say in French, the carry-on effect. And when you spark these kinds of aha moments, this is the light bulb moment, the learning moment, where people observe the inability, observe the errors of translation, and say, maybe I should remember this in the future.
So I'm thinking more the listeners, but perhaps also the practitioners in those situations
Absolutely.
It's like having a bright light shone on to their ability or lack thereof to hear what somebody else is saying. and to reflect it back to them. And I guess to think that that's an important thing to do.
I am feeling heard, Martin.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, well, I guess we're kind of running out here, aren't we? How many more have we got here, Edwin?
We got 20 minutes.
20 minutes? Okay. Well, I guess I'll keep going around the circle then. And Edwin?
Okay, listening.
I'm not actually sure that I have a lot to say, which is unusual for me. It's quite an exciting conversation, and I'd be certainly interested to see whether any of the ideas that have gone around here and how they get incorporated into the empathy circles. I think the empathy circle as it is right now, as you call it, a stage one, first lesson, is valuable just the way it is. But then when you move into some kind of functional application, which is what Minta was talking about, where people are looking for some outcomes, which is more kind of my territory, then I can see that perhaps some new technology, some new methods, kind of that you can move to, might be quite useful.
Okay, so at first you weren't sure what to talk about, and kind of joking that that's something for you not to know what to talk about, but then you had some ideas, and it's really about sort of that you feel that you and Minter want some sort of an outcome from the empathy circle, and how do you move from sort of the stage one to stage two, and just sort of wondering if anything will come out of it, but then also valuing just the basic practice itself too.
Yes, and I think going around the basic practice, it's almost like you want to do a debrief. I mean, sometimes there is a little quick debrief at the end of the empathy circles. You have that last round. What did you get out of this kind of a round? And usually it's in my experience, it's kind of like a feel good and kind of put it to bed kind of round. But I guess I haven't used an empathy circle in anger, if you like. I haven't taken it to the front lines with me, other than there are elements of the obviously the close listening and the reflective listening that we use in mediation. But I haven't sort of sat to myself in a mediation and said, you know what, this mediation is off the rails. What we need to do is an empathy circle. And here's how it works. And let's go around and do this. I haven't actually done that in an actual situation, but it might be interesting to try and just see how it works, where you just kind of shift people. I mean, we often do the reflective thing. Listen, what I want you to do is imagine being in the other person's shoes. I mean, we actually do that, mm-hmm. And I want you to tell me what you think that they think of this situation. What do you think they might think of the fact that you did that, And so we'll often do that kind of technique, which is a little bit, it is kind of forcing them into an empathic position.
Mm-hmm. So you're wondering like how it would work, like using an empathy circle in a real conflict with anger. And you do sort of role taking. You have the participants sort of like, what would you be feeling if you were the other person? Do you do that sort of role taking, but not sort of the empathic listening? It sounds like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I probably
wondering about that.
Yeah, I haven't watched the whole video of the tent at the Berkeley fracas there that you did, where you took the tent out and you had that leader of the alt-right came in, and I watched some little bits of it, but I haven't watched the whole thing. So is that something you would recommend, that I watch the whole thing? because there's some real nuggets in there.
Yeah, so you're just wondering, like, would that be a good example, the alt-right and the left talking at Berkeley, if that would be a good example of how to mediate a really contentious circle?
Using
empathy
circle technology. Yeah, right.
Yeah. I
was looking for an answer.
Okay, so yeah, you really would like an answer, and just you feel heard?
I do.
Okay, then I'll speak back to you.
Let me just kill this machine here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the circle that you're talking about, it only went for about 10, 15 minutes, and it was interrupted by Antifa, or the group, because they were screaming and yelling, and we couldn't even hear each other talk. So it's not the best example of a successful empathy circle. Because it was interrupted, and then we stood up, and then we're just like surrounded by media, and we ended up doing all these media, discussions, which took us off from the empathy circle. It is an example of what in an intense situation, something that didn't work totally well, because it was so much screaming and yelling around the outskirts of people trying to shut it down.
Right. Oh, that's right. You're talking to me.
Yeah.
And I'm reflecting. Right. I was listening to the answer to all my questions. There you go. Okay. So you were answering the fact that example of the trying to introduce the empathy circle into a very tense situation only lasted about 10 minutes, in fact. So I actually probably did see most of it. But it descended into screaming and shouting, and
not by the participants, but by outside people trying to shut it down. They did not, the political left did not want the dialogue to take place. So they were screaming and yelling. We were talking to each other from me to just across with a megaphone to hear each other. We were sharing a megaphone to speak to someone like 3 or 4 feet away, because there was so much outside screaming and potential violence coming in. So that wasn't the most effective, environment for holding, an empathy circle.
Right. So the participants themselves were ready to go along with the empathy circle technology, but the outside, the political left, in this case, didn't want this to happen for whatever reason, and was attempting to interrupt, shouting at very short distances with a megaphone to interrupt.
Yeah, and the participants were doing great. It was actually quite easy, because the participants were doing a really good job. The next day we set up at UC Berkeley again with our empathy tent, and the leader on the right, he brought a friend of his, and there's a recording of this. And this friend of his is very well known in the right wing, because he was one of the first to fight back against Antifa. I mean, he's huge. He was a fighter. And so he became a real hero on the right for, standing up and fighting back. And then the leader of the group brought him to the tent and said, "This guy needs an empathy circle." So he sat down. There was no Antifa, there was no left. We just grabbed somebody that was on the left. We sat down and did a half an hour empathy circle. It worked great. I mean, it worked really well, because there was nobody trying to shut it down. It was just, it was easy to mediate. Right.
So the next day, one of the right-wing guys brought a leader. One of the right-wing.
The leader of the right-wing group brought one of the members.
Right, a big guy, a fighter, and said, "This guy needs an empathy circle." And you sat down with him and had a successful half-hour empathy.
Yeah. And this guy, his name was Kyle, and there's an article written about it, and there's a video of it too, so I can send you the link. He started playing a little bit, like he wasn't really reflecting, And, you know, he was kind of making fun. I said, no, you just reflect back what you hear the other person said. And he says, oh, this is serious. So, and he took it serious. I mean, he really tried to, you know, take it seriously. So in that context, I find, you know, you're talking about the right. If the right takes part, they usually really like the practice. They like the structure. They like the effectiveness of it. It's just getting them into the circle. But once they get into it, they tend to be very supportive of it.
Okay, so the guy who came, you know, at first he was a little bit playful and just kind of like going along with the whole thing. But you said, no, you just reflect what you hear. And so he said, oh, okay, well, this is serious. And he did that, and then he got into it. And your experience has been that the people on the right typically, once they get into the process and understand how it goes, actually do very well with it and like it.
Well, there's a ton of other stuff I could say, but I just see our time. We only got 11 minutes left, so maybe we'll stop here and we can just kind of open it up for sort of a 11 minutes debrief, freestyle, you know, discussion. Anybody?
I felt that little exchange that we had, there was a couple of moments there where we kind of like were on the edge of just dialogue as opposed to reflecting back and forth, mostly because I wasn't really doing it very well. But
I felt heard.
You felt heard? Oh, good.
Yeah,
oh, good.
I felt.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this. I think we need 3 or 4 hours. Is our family, we've done 4 or 5 hours in our family empathy circles. You know, you're just kind of getting warmed up, but just after a couple hours.
Well, it's amazing. These 2 hours have gone by just like that. I mean, you know, sometimes I think 2 hours, that's a big commitment, you know, 2 hours of time. But that went by pretty quick, and no, it was a pleasure.
I think the objective was specific, and that allowed for a, you know, we kept on track for the most part, you know, with wobbles and maybe in, you know, necessary wobbles to move around and explore different areas. And again, it's interesting, as you say, Martin, how quickly time can fly. I'm totally in favor of empathy circles as a preliminary base, as a way to explore and democratize. I'm more in phase 2 land, and so that's where I come from this, where I think about how to embed it into business, where, you know, 15-minute meetings are already sometimes too long, and there are just too many meetings as it is. And while if we spend more time thinking about strategy and being nice to each other, or at least listening to one another, one could speed things along for sure. To get it in the door, you can't go in with a 2-hour regular empathy circle. So need to structure it differently as far as putting it into business is concerned. Yet, I think that you mentioned the half-hour version, Edwin, and or maybe it was you, Martin, but we can do shorter versions that could have interesting, maybe spectacular effects, maybe not quite as long-lasting. Just like meditation takes time to instill. You're not going to learn to be a guru of meditation by 1 10-minute, you know, guided session. So I damn is right.
Sorry. Yeah, there's some years ago I did a course called Corporate Circles. It's Maureen Fitzgerald. She wrote a book called Corporate Circles, and one of the lines that always stuck with me was, if you're arranging a corporate meeting, get there half an hour early and hide the table. And so everybody is sitting around in chairs with no table in the middle. And it completely changes the whole dynamic of the way that people relate in that situation. And go ahead.
Get rid of the chairs.
That too, you could, although being Westerners, we tend to sit in chairs. It's really hard doing cross-legged on the floor, you know, if you haven't.
No, just standing up.
Standing up. That's the new way, I guess. Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of going that far. Normally, I do corporate circles, and I do, circles in many large group conflict situations, and it's normally a little bit of the kind of the talking stick and the celebratory object of some sort in the center of the circle, and everybody sitting on chairs around. And it is a very powerful technique, for sure.
Yeah, we had used that at Occupy Wall Street in the empathy tent. And it was, I just found that people really wanted to speak more. Because you get a big group, it was limited in terms of, you know, how much time you have to speak. So the idea was to break it up into really small groups, so it could be a lot more active. You know, it can be a lot more active. So that was sort of the.
There's another one called dynamic facilitation for large talkative groups, which developed by a guy over here in Port Townsend in Washington State, Jim Ruff, and that's when you set up 4 boards with recorders on them, and they each have a different topic and thing they're recording. And when you go into the room, there's always somebody ready to burst. You know, they just want to let it out. So you go to them first. And so what you do is you follow the energy in the room. And as that person talks, you record everything they say on these 4 boards, and you keep asking them, well, have we got it? Have we got everything? Got all your points here? And eventually they'll look and they'll say, yeah, I think you got it all. You suck them dry, and then they sit down and shut up, and you go to the next one, and you work your way down through the energy levels until you get to the last guys, and then you say, John, you didn't say much today. What have you got to say? You know, and you pull them in at the end. And so
I know Rosa. She's one of the.
She's doing that. That's right. I forgot about Rosa.
Yeah, so she and I have worked a lot with the empathy circles. So, and she is now using empathy circles as a gateway practice into dynamic facilitation, because it's that initial phase where people are just like dying to be heard.
Yes.
And so by teaching everyone to do an empathy circle, they're sort of purging all that energy to begin with. And they're also learning the empathic listening practice, because in the dynamic facilitation, she's actually called an empathic inquiry as well. Is that the facilitator is doing the reflection. Like, it is empathic listening, but the facilitator reflects back what the speaker is saying, makes sure the speaker feels heard, and then they put it into those categories. So they start giving form, different buckets, basically, if you're using design, and they start organizing the material. And you just keep going. She does 2-day workshops, on this. But now she's starting with empathy circles as a first step, because it kind of teaches everyone sort of the practice. So that is another aspect in terms of artificial intelligence or, augmenting tools, is to start capturing what has been generated and giving it form. Like, what are the problems? What are the solutions? What is the data? And so forth. So it would totally fit. It's, again, the gateway, but again, this empathic listening is the gateway to that whole practice.
So I close with one final thought, which is a problem. A friend, someone who read my book, says, "Oh, I really love your book, and it's really great." And I said, "Well, why don't you? Have you ever done an empathy circle?" And he said, "No, I don't know what it is." And my thought was, well, how do I get him to know about it without him doing it, if you will, with us, to shepherd him in? And it just struck me, the problem I'm voicing is it requires a shepherd somehow to bring them in, like I would say a first trip on LSD. And once you're in, you're like, oh, got it. I know what it is. I can do it. But as far as propagating it, it'd be lovely if I could just write out on my Twitter feed, hey guys, do an empathy circle on our problem. But that won't fly. You kind of need to have someone ushering them in, and then they can fly by themselves.
Yeah, well, great. So this is part of it, of creating that introductory, those little baby steps. That's what I've been working at. And this circle is sort of helping to build those baby steps with trainings and make it really easy for people to do that first step. So thanks for that, because that's definitely what I'd like to create.
Is there an ELISA today? Is there an ELISA today where, for instance, I can tell a story to my computer and then I can sit back and my computer reflects my story back to me and reformulated?
Well, I would suggest trying two. One's Mitsuku, which is they're both bots, MITSUKU, and the second is Woebot, WOEBOT, and they're both interesting experiments or opportunities to converse. So it's conversational AI, and they are more or less, I mean, they're more sophisticated than ELISA, for sure. Mitsuku, I'm actually going to have on my podcast soon, the guy who created that, Steve Warswick. He gave the bot some agency on top of that, and it's won many years in a row the Alan Turing test or reward. So it's quite phenomenal. And Woebot is interesting because it has a sense of humor. Anyway, try them out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, with that, we will close then. Thank you very much. Very grateful for your participation. I learned a lot, and look forward to connecting in the future, keeping the ball rolling, building this empathy mode.